Let's turn our attention, though, to COVID-19, of course. A lot resting on our vaccine rollout. To see how it's going, what the government might be taking into account before the federal budget tonight. Joining me now is Sanjaya Senanayake, infectious diseases expert at the Australian National University. And don't worry, I'm not asking you to be a budget predictor, but you can tell us other things they'll be thinking about. I just wanted to start with the latest on vaccines with some good news. The latest studies on AstraZeneca and Pfizer, that they're really effective even against the latest variants. There was a small study suggesting Pfizer might not be great, but a bigger one suggesting it's pretty effective still.
Yeah, that's right, Tom. So we have seen differing studies from different parts of the world, some bigger, some smaller. But overall, we're seeing with Pfizer, Moderna, those new mRNA vaccines, that they seem to be very effective against most of the new strains of the vaccine. And even AstraZeneca, because we were quite worried, particularly with the South African study, which was a small study involving very young people, but it seems also to be very beneficial in fighting COVID in many forms.
A lesson not to jump onto the first headline, because I think the first one said it was 10% effective, which is way off according to the bigger study right on South Africa. I know we keep talking about this, but the virus, we know there'll be variants. Is it fair to say, particularly with mRNA and this ability to turn around vaccines in 6 weeks, that we can be effective, we can keep, if there are variants that do go beyond the current vaccine, we'll be able to stay ahead of it?
Yeah, so that's been a real revelation, because prior to the mRNA vaccines, say with the AstraZeneca vaccine, if they have to adjust it, it takes about 6 months. But with these mRNA vaccines, you correctly said, it takes 6 weeks. So that's a huge game changer. Having said that, now, if someone in the lab adjusts it within 6 weeks, it still has to be mass-produced, distributed, etc. So it's not going to be easy, but it's certainly easier.
Yeah. Interested, well, the last time there was a pandemic that stopped the world, it was the Spanish flu. What did we learn from that? My very brief research, as not an expert here, was that it died out quite quickly because people either died or they were immune to it. Are there any similarities we can view in terms of COVID, or the fact that the Spanish flu was just ravaged the world so much meant it just played out very differently?
Yeah, so the Spanish flu was a different kettle of fish, not necessarily because it was a different virus, although it was, but it was a different time, different technology. Antibiotics weren't around, so a lot of people died from secondary bacterial pneumonia after getting flu. And as you said, so many people got infected, you were getting towards herd immunity just because the large volume of infection was there. So we could learn a few things from it, and we have learned a few things from it, but COVID is a new infection, and from COVID, we're going to learn so much when the next pandemic arrives.
Yeah, and no hope that this will sort of end in a year, unfortunately, at least totally. What do you make of this push to have a target? The latest one is 80% of vulnerable Australians, if they're all vaccinated, that people should be able to travel to low and medium risk countries.
Yes, look, Germany might be a country that we watch in anticipation of what will happen. Germany over the weekend passed a federal law saying that if people have been infected within the last 6 months by COVID or have had both their COVID vaccinations, they will be freed from all restrictions and they'll be able to travel overseas and come back without quarantining. And Germany, I think at the moment, about 30% of their population have received 1 dose of vaccine, so they certainly haven't reached herd immunity by any means. So it may not be an unreasonable thing to do, but in the same way when the vaccines were rolled out, we got to watch in Australia because we didn't have such a huge COVID outbreak issue. We can watch and see what countries like Germany do and how they respond when they have these measures in place.
How has it been? Because it seems the appetite for any sort of risk has really dropped in Australia. You're an expert in this area, and you'd be well aware of, there are constantly calculations of risks, whether it be vaccines or, speed limits. Anyone that gets general anaesthetic, there are always risks. Are we too focused? We had these donut days, 0, 0, 0, a single death. Almost the line is, 1 death is too many, whereas realistically, that's not how we live in society.
And I think people in the Northern Hemisphere probably watch with some amazement how we respond to 1 or 2 cases suddenly appearing. But having said that, the issue, Tom, is that 1 or 2 cases, particularly with these new variants of concern, can turn into something a lot worse, perhaps something like we had in Melbourne in the middle of last year. I mean, certainly our public health authorities throughout the states and territories have managed these outbreaks very well, but there is also luck involved. All you needed was one super spreading event and you'd be in big trouble. So really, getting our vaccine rollout headed in the right direction, moving faster, will be very important before we can talk about lower risk.
Once that's happened and all vulnerable groups are okay, and then you can really start to release the handbrakes, hopefully. Sanjaya Senanayake, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Tom.